Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carole Légaré, and I will be providing an overview of the ICH E6 R3 Step 2 document on good clinical practice. First, I would like to acknowledge that what I will present comes from the ICH presentation posted on the ICH website. The draft E6R3 was signed off by ICH on May 19, 2023, thus allowing us to proceed with public consultation. At this time, consultation has now closed. The initial version of E6 was published in 1996 and was updated in 2016. E6 should not be read in isolation. Many other ICH guidelines may apply, but E8 is especially important. This is because E8 discusses the clinical trial design issues that are most critical to clinical trial quality. After E6R2 was published, many academic researchers wrote to ICH to complain about a lack of flexibility and the lack of their involvement in developing a guideline that they are required to follow in many jurisdictions. The article shown here, for example, reports on the results of stakeholder interviews conducted by the Clinical Trial Transformation Initiative. 5 teams emerged from these interviews on participants' expectations for the revision. Incorporate flexibility, simplify the guidance, accommodate advances in research conduct, update and clarify language, and be transparent and inclusive. The E6R3 working group started by doing a gap analysis, looking at stakeholders' comments from various sources listed here, as well as other ICH guidelines. What we took away from the feedback was that although E6 is primarily intended for clinical trials to support market authorizations of medicinal products, it's also widely applied to other types of clinical trials of medicines. In fact, GCP is required for academic trials in Canada. There were also concerns that the R2 guidance had a one-size-fits-all approach with resulting over-interpretation of GCP requirements. There were concerns about the ability of clinical trials to meet all GCP requirements in different situations, such as those we saw during the pandemic. Clinical trials are a fundamental part of clinical research that support the development of new medicines or the new use of existing medicines. Well-designed and conducted clinical trials help answer key questions in healthcare and drug development. Their results are essential for evidence-based decisions. Trial with inadequate design or trials that are poorly conducted may place participant safety at risk and yield inadequate or unreliable evidence and are therefore unethical. They waste resources and the efforts and time of investigators and participants. The principles of GCP are designed to be flexible and applicable to a broad range of clinical trials. E6R3, along with E8, encourage thoughtful consideration and planning to address specific and potentially unique aspects for an individual clinical trial. Careful consideration of factors is needed for each clinical trial in order to ensure clinical trial quality. The development process for E6R3 was quite unique. In order to respond to stakeholders' requests for transparency and inclusiveness, we engage a group of academic stakeholders in a series of joint meetings with the expert working group. To increase transparency, we published the draft principles in 2021 and held public web conferences. There's also a plan for extensive training material to be developed using case examples to clarify the application of GCP. So what is new about E6R3 structure and content? We changed the structure of the guideline to provide more clarity and improve readability. We added language to facilitate innovations in design, technology, and operational approaches. We tried to set practical and feasible expectations around the responsibilities of the sponsor and investigator with respect to a digital environment. The guideline focuses on a fit-for-purpose approach with an emphasis on proportionality and risk-based approach. We incorporated lessons learned from the pandemic, and the guideline encourages public registration of trials and the disclosure of their results, and it also encourages the use of concise consent forms and the use of technology to support the consent process. The foundation of E6R3 is the set of principles. They would apply in all situations. Annex 1 describes the GCP expectations for clinical trials, and they would apply to all types of clinical trial. Annex 2, which is under development, will provide additional considerations for specific types of trials using decentralized trials, pragmatic trials, and the use of real-world data in clinical trials as examples. However, Annex 2 will not introduce any new requirements. Rather, it will discuss what needs to be considered so that GCP can be applied to those trials. Here is the revised structure. We have an introduction, followed by the principles of GCP. Then Annex 1 is made up of 4 sections which deal with ethics committees, investigator, sponsor, and a new section on data governance. Then we have a glossary and 3 appendices, one on the investigational brochure, one on protocols and protocol amendments, and one on essential records. The thought process behind the revision was to get people involved in the development of clinical trials to think about what is important, involve the right stakeholders, and design trials to answer the scientific questions while ensuring participant safety and the reliability of the results. It therefore builds on E8, which encourages a proportionate risk-based approach with a focus on activities that are critical to achieving the trial objectives. The guideline aims to support efficient approaches to trial design and conduct. It further expands on the use of technologies such as digital health technologies and wearables. It also encourages including the perspective of stakeholders such as patients and healthcare professionals in the trial design, which can lead to more meaningful trial outcome measures and guide decisions on feasibility of the study. Again, in line with E8, trials should identify factors that are critical to ensure participant safety and the integrity of results. The processes and risk mitigation strategies should be proportionate to the importance of the data being collected and the risk to the safety of participants. We should avoid unnecessary complexity. While there are changes in all sections of the document, the ones listed on top were the object of more substantial changes. Here's a table relating the revised principles to the sections of E6R3. The principles are not entirely new, but we put additional focus on responsibilities and risks. The principles on risk proportionality focuses on participant safety and reliability of results, and on risks that go beyond those associated with standard medical care. Given the blurring of lines of responsibility between investigators and the sponsor with the changing clinical trials landscape, the principle on roles and responsibilities focus on clarification of transfer of activities by the sponsor and delegation of activities by the investigator, and the maintenance of appropriate oversight. All the principles were revised to some extent. For example, one should make sure not to unnecessarily exclude particular participant populations. The informed consent process should take into consideration relevant aspects of the trial, the setting and context in which the trial will be conducted, and the potential use of technology. Also, periodic review of the scientific knowledge should be conducted to determine if modifications to the trial are required. The quality of the information generated in the trial should support good decision-making, and the protocol should be clear, concise, and operationally feasible. There is an emphasis that trial processes should support key trial objectives, and sponsors are encouraged to register trials in publicly available databases and disclose their results. Investigational products should be carefully managed and retain their quality throughout the trial. The first section in Annex 1 is on ethics committees. We included global language about reporting to ethics committees and regulatory authorities in order to reflect the different practices in different jurisdictions. We also updated the variable approaches to obtain consent and clarified the potential for participants to be compensated for costs incurred in order to participate in a trial. The next section is on the investigator. Again, it allows for various approaches for getting informed consent, highlighting that the ICF should be clear and concise and allowing the use of technology. It also clarifies that a process for reconsent should be considered if during the trial a minor reaches the age of legal consent in accordance with applicable regulatory requirement. The guideline clarified a number of points. For example, trial-related training for staff should be about their trial-related activities that go beyond their usual training and experience. The guideline also clarified the expectations between the sponsor and investigators regarding service providers. We clarified expectations regarding identification and maintenance of source records. For example, we should avoid unnecessary transcription steps in between the source record and the data acquisition tool. There should also be timely review of data that may impact participant eligibility, treatment, or safety. We clarified requirement for the documentation of delegation. For example, specific documentation of delegation may not be required in situations where the clinical trial activities are performed in accordance with routine clinical care. The next section is about the sponsor, which includes a new subsection on sponsor oversight. There are some clarifications under the monitoring section. For example, the monitoring strategy should consider the trial purpose, its design, the use of blinding, safety profile, and endpoints in line with the risk proportionate approach for that investigational product in that participant population. The monitoring plan should focus on aspects that are critical to quality. For the investigational product, it was clarified that alternative approaches for drug accountability records may be applicable when dealing with marketed products. We clarified that the sponsor should adopt a proportionate and risk-based approach to quality management, which involves incorporating quality into the design of the clinical trial, again, a reference to E8, and identifying those factors that are likely to have a meaningful impact on participant safety and the reliability of the results. There are also clarifications that sponsor oversight extend to central facilities. There is a new section on data governance. It indicates that the sponsor should apply quality control to the relevant stages of data handling to ensure the data is of sufficient quality. The requirement for computerized systems should be proportionate to the importance of those systems and the data or activities they are expected to process. It addresses topics such as IT security, data protection, data validation, metadata, and data acquisition tools. The glossary section defines some new terms and revised the definition of others. Some definitions were added to support advances in the clinical trial ecosystem, while others were adapted to allow new clinical trial approaches such as decentralized trials. We also needed to ensure that they were media neutral in view of the greater role of technology. We also replaced the word subject by participant throughout the document and removed some confusing language. The first appendix is on the investigator's brochure. There was not much change to this section. We clarified that information on both the frequency and nature of expected adverse reaction should be included. The second appendix is on protocols and protocol amendments. We highlighted the importance of building adaptability into the protocol in order to avoid protocol deviations and amendments, as well as observations during inspection. In alignment with E8, we encourage the use of protocols that minimize unnecessary complexity and focus on what is critical. There is more information regarding withdrawal of consent. The appendix on essential records was the object of a major rewrite. E6R3 provides a list of criteria to determine whether a specific clinical trial record is essential and needs to be retained. We provided clarity on the management of these records. For example, for activities that are transferred or delegated to a clinical research organization, arrangements should be made for the access and management of the essential records throughout the trial and for their retention following completion of the trial. We created two tables, one outlining what will be considered an essential record in every clinical trial, and one listing potential essential records. So these are records that would become essential if they were generated during the trial. In summary, novel approaches to clinical trial design and conduct have the potential to streamline drug development and increase the convenience of clinical trials for participants. The intent of the revised E6 is to facilitate innovation in trial design and conduct while helping to ensure participant safety and reliable results. We are currently addressing comments from the consultation, and the final document is expected by the end of the year. Thank you.